If you're just joining my series on dialogue, then I suggest you first look at part one titled Confusing Dialogue with Narration before starting this one. It will make this video easier to follow. Now, in part two titled How Dialogue Moves Your Story Forward, I'll talk about exactly that, how your story is moved forward with the help of dialogue. One area where both dialogue and narration are similar regarding their main objective to your novel is to move the story along. If you watch my series on narration, you understood that without a way of conveying the author's story to the reader, there is no story. Time for another of my little tales. A young man by the name of Joey from a rough part of town was known as the neighborhood bully. He lived on the first level of a three-story building in a one-bedroom apartment that faced out onto the main street. From his bedroom window, he was able to see all the people who either walked or drove past the building. But when he wasn't watching people passing by, he was roaming about the building doing what he did best, bullying all the other tenants. He actually took great pride in tormenting his neighbors. He didn't care who they were or how kind they had been to him in the past. He found immense pleasure in their suffering. You see, Joey had a generic condition. He was unable to show sympathy for anyone because he lacked empathy. Yes, from the time he was a small child, he hadn't the ability to empathize with another person. It was believed that he inherited this condition from his father, who was hated by all because he treated everyone he met with a level of hatred only someone lacking empathy could display. Try as she may, Joey's mother's loving manner had little effect on her son and even less on her father, her husband. The other tenants in the building would usually go out of their way to avoid a confrontation with Joey, who was always in search of one. Since most of the tenants of the building had known Joey all of his life, they knew when and where to be so as to have the least possible chance of running into him. It was easier during his schooling years because at least then they only had the evenings, the weekends, and school breaks to worry about him. But now, in his 20s and without a job, there was no telling when a tenant might find themselves bumping into him in the hallways. Joey enjoyed tormenting his neighbors, but there was one in particular that he actually went out of his way to bother. Her name was Sarah, and she was the same age as Joey. In fact, they used to be in the same classes throughout most of their school years. So, unfortunately for Sarah, there was no escaping Joey. But although they grew up together, they were nothing alike. Where Joey enjoyed watching others suffer, Sarah could feel nothing but love and forgiveness for anyone, including Joey. As much as he tormented and ridiculed her whenever he got the opportunity, she always found a way to forgive him. That's probably why he targeted her more than anyone else. He believed that one day he would find her breaking point and relish in her descent into an irreversible fury. Then one day after showing up at her apartment, Joey proceeded to torment Sarah. He decided to see just how far her forgiving nature would go. So he took out his knife and stabbed her in the arm with it. Smiling, he was sure that would be her breaking point, and he would finally be able to see what she was like under her goody goody facade. But when she merely stared back at him with her usual look of forgiveness, he rolled his eyes and walked away. A couple of days later, he saw her at the supermarket and struck up a conversation with her. After they spoke for a while and he could see that she truly had forgiven him for stabbing her, he told her he wished he could trade all of his bad ways for all of her good ways for just 1 week so he could understand what it was like to be like her. The next morning, he woke up feeling different. He soon realized that he didn't want to torment his neighbors anymore. In fact, he enjoyed his new outlook on life, that he spent the rest of the week being kind and helpful to all of his neighbors. Knowing that he had just 1 day left before having to go back to being the way he was, he decided to go to Sarah's apartment and ask her if he could have another week of her empathy. Today, I'll talk about the way your dialogue can move your story forward. Then, I'll tell you what Sarah's answer was. Now, think of dialogue as giving your character a voice by which to express themselves. And now, think of their verbal expression as a catalyst from where that expression not only allows your reader an insight into better understanding that character, but a way for your reader to follow them along their journey through your novel. I admit, that's quite confusing. It's sounding a little too much like a paragraph out of a school textbook. So let's try it from a different angle. We'll use another example to make it easier to understand. If you remember from the first video of this series, I first began by stating that, like narration, the dialogue's main purpose in your novel is to move it forward. You might also recall that I earlier stated, unlike narration that isn't bound by time, dialogue is what's happening in real time. That's fine. It can happen now, providing it moves your story forward. Let's go back to our man Stan in the bank. For this example, we'll follow a scene with no narration to illustrate a dialogue that doesn't move the story along. Okay, Stan, there's no turning back now. He said to himself, "You can do this. Stay calm and get in line. Oh dear God, he's found me. I thought for sure I'd lost him on that other street. How does he keep finding me? He's calling his partner. I know he is. Who else could he be calling? They know what I'm about to do. That's it. I can't go through with it. It's not worth it." In this scene, he hasn't done anything to move your story forward. He's merely talked to himself for a while before noticing the man on the cell phone and changed his mind. There isn't even any indication that he's in a bank. For all we know, he might be in line at a bakery cheating on his diet. Even if he got into a conversation with another character, unless that conversation led to something integral that resulted in moving your story along, the dialogue is pointless. Here's an example with no narration to illustrate a dialogue that actually moves the story along. Okay, Stan, there's no turning back now, he said to himself. You can do this. Stay calm and get in line. You're in a bank. Act normal. Oh dear God, he's found me. I thought for sure I'd lost him on that other street. How does he keep finding me? He's calling his partner. I know he is. I can see him in the van across the street. They know I'm about to rob the bank. That's it. I can't go through with it. It's not worth it. Wait a second. The guy with the baseball cap in the car behind the van. If he's here, Who's watching my family? They could be in danger. I've got to get home. If you noticed, in this scene, the dialogue alone has done a good job in moving your story forward. If you watched my earlier video on cause and effect, through narration, it was conveyed that a man walked into a bank, then after a while, walks out again. We have no idea why he suddenly walked out. We only know that he lost the attention of your reader. But with a few simple lines of dialogue that weren't available at that time, we now understand the possible danger to his family is what has caused him to suddenly leave the bank and hurry home. Whatever he was planning on doing in the bank has changed. He is now on a quest to save his family. At this point, we still don't know who or what possesses a threat to his family, but that doesn't matter. The dialogue is only dealing with what's happening in real time and did what it's intended to do, to move your story forward. Now, your reader is curious to know what the man will do next. If you remember the importance of cause and effect, the cause being his sighting of the man in the baseball cap and the effect being his rushing home to his family. It's important to understand that dialogue, no matter who is part of the conversation, must be in conflict. If you watched my earlier video on conflict, you know that conflict, as the engine of the narrative, creates obstacles that your characters must overcome in their journey to achieve their goal. Now, imagine overhearing a conversation between two neighbors that went like this. "Looks like rain," said Harley. "Yep, looks like rain," said Wilfred. "What kind of clouds you suppose those are coming from the west?" asked Harley. "Rain clouds, I figure," answered Wilfred. "You're probably right," agreed Harley. "They're probably filled to the brim," added Wilfred. "They do look pretty full," added Harley. "Ready to bust wide open at any moment," smiled Wilfred. "Yep, any moment," smiled Harley. These are obviously two neighbors with nothing better to do than to talk about whatever comes to mind. Anyone listening would most likely tune them out. And if they were characters in your book, your reader would most likely skip ahead to a more exciting page, having missed nothing significant. Now, let's have some fun and add some conflict. "Looks like rain," said Harley. "Been listening to the weatherman?" asked Wilfred. "Don't much care one way or the other about what he has to say," answered Harley. "I've been watching those rain clouds." "Not just rain clouds," added Wilfred. "Them there are storm clouds." "Too small for storm clouds," said Harley. "Whatever the size, guaranteed they're filled to the brim," said Wilfred. "Doubt they're holding enough to soak the crops," said Harley. "I disagree. $10 says by morning this will be swampland," smiled Wilfred. "You owe me 10 from the last time," said Harley. "Then tomorrow will be even," smiled Wilfred. In the first example, the two characters simply stated the obvious and agreed with each other. This made for a very boring and predictable conversation. There wasn't any conflict, and it did nothing to move the story along. In the second example, the two characters opposed each other. We gathered a certain amount of information as well. They don't believe in or rely on the weatherman. They are in a rural area, probably farmers because they mentioned crops. They've known each other for a while and they like to bet against one another. Their opposing behavior toward each other creates conflict, giving your reader something to anticipate, and by doing so, moves your story forward. Having said that, it's not enough for there to be just conflict in dialogue. It must also have a purpose. If the characters betting on whether there will be a storm or just a light rain shower has nothing to do with the story, then the dialogue is pointless. But it's important to understand, although the conversation about the weather might seem from the onset meaningless, if the author has, prior to this conversation, alluded to the fact that the crops will be affected by this rainstorm, it gives the dialogue purpose. The story may have been building to this very storm that will either destroy all the crops with too much rainwater or which will allow them to die from not enough rainwater during an ongoing drought. But if this is a story that has nothing to do with crops or the weather, then it has no purpose and shouldn't be part of it. If we were reading a story about the man in the bank, and then we read a dialogue between two farmers in a conversation about the weather, unless a correlation between bank robbing and dying crops can be made, the farmer's dialogue has no purpose. Which, if you remember, in my video on cause and effect, it was determined that the farmer, because of a few bad harvests, wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and the bank then foreclosed on his farm, which caused him to try to rob that bank. With something like this, a prior scene with a conversation between two farmers would definitely help in moving your story along. In part 3 of my series on dialogue, titled The Importance of Dialogue Tags, I will explain just what a dialogue tag is. And now, the ending to the story I call I'm Happy to Be You. When Joey knocked on Sarah's door, she opened it with a calm look on her face. She had been expecting him and had been patiently waiting inside her apartment, knowing that he would come in search of her within a week's time. With all the sincerity and honesty, he asked her to allow him some more time so he could continue to make amends to all of the people he had wronged over the years. But Sarah remained quiet and merely stared back at him in her doorway. Then she brought into view his knife he had left in her arm the day he stabbed her. Then she lifted the knife and drove it into his chest. And as he fell back into the hallway and to the floor, dead, Sarah closed her door and went back to her reading. She didn't even show any signs of remorse. She couldn't. She had traded Joey all of her kindness and empathy to help him become a better person, saving none for herself. So, without any empathy for guidance, killing him meant nothing to her. Thanks for watching, and if you found anything that I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button because you never know, my next video might just be helpful too.
Te la doy mi corazón, ven y mueve tu cuerpo, el sol, las luces brillan.